We're here at the rocky shore on Longis Bay. The tide's really low today, so we're going to take the opportunity and show you what seaweeds we can find. The rocky shore can be divided into three sections. The upper shore, where I am now, the mid-shore and the lower shore. Each area has seaweeds that are perfectly adapted to live within those environments. The seaweeds that we find on the upper shore are best adapted to long periods outside of the water. We've got two species here, what you might know here as egg rack and here as bladder rack. Both of these species have large air pockets within the seaweed. This allows them to maximise the time spent submerged in water at high tide. Lots of species on the upper shore here almost seem to dry out. They're much more tolerant to desiccation. Now we're at the mid-shore, the species we find are starting to change. Here we have serrated rack. It's one that's used to spending longer in water and therefore doesn't need those air pockets. On our shores we're getting an increasing amount of this. It's Sargassum Seaweed. It's actually an invasive seaweed that outcompetes for most things on our shores. Sargassum seaweed grows across the rocky shore and can grow at up to 20 centimetres per day in the spring. Across the rocky shore we have a prevalence of green seaweeds like this. This is sea lettuce. Although none of the seaweeds on our rocky shores are toxic, sea lettuce is by far one of the most popular edible seaweeds. Sea lettuce and its relation gutweed are both very common on our rocky shores. Do remember though, if you are taking some, only to take what you need. Next door we have some pepper dulse. It has a very distinctive peppery taste, which is actually one of the best ways to ID it if you're unsure. Just remember to cut it rather than pulling at the base, as you'll get lots of rocks and bits of shingle with it if you're not careful. Brown tuning fork seaweed. You can see it's growing here, all around us. You'll find it again across the shore. The distribution of brown tuning fork seaweed is thought to be moving in response to changing ocean temperatures, something that changes the dynamics of our rocky shores. Here's an interesting seaweed. This one has purples, greens and blues when it's submerged in water. Colours that are lost when exposed to air. As we move towards the lower rocky shore, here at low tide, the composition changes again. Here we have seaweeds that spend most of their time submerged in water. For example, kelp, thongweed, and a number of red seaweeds here. Much of the red seaweed you see here is dulse, another fantastic edible seaweed. Even the rocky shore isn't immune to our litter. Remember that these areas aren't our home, but they are home to a number of other organisms. Take your litter with you.
One type of seaweed we wouldn't particularly recommend eating are the racks, so bladder rack, egg rack and serrated rack. They're not inedible, but they don't taste particularly nice. Green seaweeds like sea lettuce and gutweed are very pleasant fresh, but they can also be dried, which gives quite a deep seafood flavour if you crumble them over a meal, or you can even eat them as crisps. They're probably best raw and don't really need much cooking, and they're also quite high in protein. The red seaweeds are also very edible. Pepper dulse, as we mentioned, is very peppery, strong flavour. Because no seaweeds are toxic, that is a good way to try and identify your seaweed and eat it fresh and raw, or you can even dry this one. Dulse is the other red seaweed that has quite a chewy texture because of its high water content, but it also is quite rich, so you can use it in place of meat. It can be cooked as a vegetable or dried and flaked, and it's high in lots of vitamins as well as protein and fibre. This last red seaweed is slightly different. It's called red rags. It's not dulse, but they're often mistaken for each other. It's also edible, but not as commonly eaten. Thongweed is a seaweed that's often popular to try. This grows on the lower shore, and young fronds that are less than about 20 centimetres can be eaten raw or even pickled. Once they're a bit older and longer, you can cook them and use them like spaghetti. So just boil it for a few minutes and you'll get a gluten-free pasta. Leave the button-like hold fast intact to ensure that the seaweed can regrow in future. Here's a few quick tips for foraging for seaweeds. Never pull seaweeds from the rocks. That's the equivalent of uprooting a plant. Take a sharp knife or some scissors with you and only take the top third of the seaweed. Don't pick just from one place, take a little from lots of different places. Our shores are home to a lot of invasive seaweeds, so be mindful of what you're taking, trying not to spread those. Also make sure you're not taking anything rare. If it doesn't seem abundant, don't take it. Only take live weed that's growing on the rocks. You don't want the stuff that's been washed up on shore, you don't know how long it's been there. And finally, seaweed can have quite strong flavours, so you usually won't need very much.